Hey folks, you're
Absolute Packer podcast initiating in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so let's start recording. There you go.
This is that insult to injury, literally. I didn't see it coming, but fitting, basically. So,
I love that I looped. I love that I looped the end, so it just never stops.
Yeah. So, welcome, Packer fans, to which episode is this? The 7th episode of Absolute Packer Podcast, which I came up with a fancy name for this one. I'm calling it Demoralized in the Dirty South. That name pretty much says it all. And then to start the podcast, before I even started talking, we have Kid Rock again.
Well,
so
you know what?
This is off the rails already.
You know what? You say it's the Dirty South, but that stadium is pretty awesome.
Yes, that's a good point.
I thought it was like crazy awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are good stadiums. The Lambeau Field is great, and the Cowboy Stadium is pretty great, but like, what is, like, they have this like 360-degree TV screen? What's that all about?
Yeah, actually, I have a unique perspective on the Falcons because I lived in Atlanta for 2 stints. I lived there in the late 80s and early 90s, and a little bit before that. When I was younger, my dad got transferred around a lot, so I'm working for Kimberly Clark. But I lived in Atlanta when they played in the Georgia Dome, which was basically the old stadium they're playing in, and that thing sucked. I mean, it was a pile of shit. I think it only lasted 20 years, which is not that long. You know, some of these stadiums, you know, their shelf life, considering the amount of money that's being spent and all this kind of stuff, that wasn't that old, but it was crappy. And so the new stadium, I think it's sponsored by Mercedes-Benz. From what I understand, it has like this aperture opening on the top that can flex and close and open. It's almost like it's like a real life butthole that puckers or something.
or like a camera shutter.
Yeah, or a butthole. You know. Any other team that's not any other team that's not the Packers, I have to come up with some kind of bodily function. But all kidding aside, that stadium did look really, really nice. And to your point, they had these screens that were 360 degrees near the top of where that aperture kind of opened. It looked impressive, and this is the second straight year the Packers have gone on the road and opened a stadium for the opposing team. Been the opponent. Last year was the Vikings, and they lost. It looked like not very good. And this year it's the Falcons, and they looked pretty bad collectively. From top to bottom was not good, but.
So let's try to jump into the bad stuff and then try to finish with some not so bad stuff if we can do that.
This will be like getting all dirty, then we'll go through the car wash at the end. So I will preface it by saying this. So I went down and I watched the game at my dad's house. He lives about 40 minutes south of Green Bay. I'm going down there and I'm listening to the radio, the pregame radio. And I had a feeling that one of the offensive tackles for the Packers wasn't going to play. I thought it was going to be Brian Bulaga. And I'm listening, and they say Brian Bulaga is inactive and David Bakhtiari is inactive. And I went, oh, my God. Because number one, those two players are very good. Bakhtiari is an all-pro left tackle. He's not just good, he's great. Bulaga's pretty darn good. Yeah. But the more so the reason I went, oh, my God, was because the depth they have behind those guys is nil. But as I say that, I think they've discovered Kyle Murphy, who played right tackle for Bulaga against Seattle, and then they moved him to left tackle against Atlanta. I think he's proved to be okay, which we'll take that at this point. It made me really nervous when Bulaga couldn't go because nobody really knew how good Kyle Murphy could be. He was unproven at everything. Second-year late-round pick. So he was okay. The guy they started at right tackle, McCray, I don't even think he was on the team a week ago. He's a guard playing tackle, and without getting into all the stuff. So anyway, the Packers, I have a note here. The Packers were overmatched before they got off the bus to get to the stadium. So that was not helping. And Atlanta's got a really good defense. You know, I wouldn't say that they're the Seattle from a few years ago, but they're pretty darn good. They have a lot of speed, so that was just not a good way to start. But the defense, Falcons come out right away. It's a hostile environment, and Falcons marched right down the field, passing all over the place, and scored a touchdown in about 4 minutes. And it looked like pretty much what we saw in the NFC Championship game last year, only the main difference was we're healthy this year, and they still got shredded. So that wasn't a good way to start. The offense responded, which was nice to see, because in that I don't know if you remember, Elliot, but in the first series, they lost Jordy Nelson in the first series.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was less than ideal.
Have you heard any update on that?
Well, what's funny is they called it a quad injury. He was grabbing his knee, but apparently the quad can kind of go over into the knee or something like that. So that was on his right knee, and that was the surgically repaired one that he tore a couple years ago. So I was going, oh my God. But apparently it was a quad. So long story short, they don't believe it's anything serious. They don't have a final diagnosis on it, but it could be just kind of a day-to-day thing. But Jordy Nelson's their number one passing threat, on the team. So losing him alters the game plan. Yeah. And if there's one thing and if there's one thing the Packers, particularly under Mike McCarthy, they're very slow to, react to changes like that. They have other weapons that they brought in, Martellus Bennett, Lance Kendricks at tight end. But if you take away anyone's number one wide receiver, the Packers or any other team, it's not good. It's punch you down tackle. Yeah. So they were down 3 starters on offense, and that is on a hostile, on the road in a hostile environment. That is not a good combination. But they scored a touchdown. What I was going to say. So they started out, the defense gave a touchdown, but then the offense scored a touchdown, and then basically from there it was all downhill for both sides of the ball. And Atlanta ran, roughshod. They lost Mike Daniels, who we know. Mike Daniels looked like Lawrence Taylor last week against the Seahawks, and he only lasted into the first quarter, and he had a soft tissue injury like Jordy Nelson. See, that's the thing with some of these injuries we saw is they're not guys breaking legs. They're not guys, getting smashed. These were like non-contact injuries. Jordy Nelson, if you saw the replay, he ran, cut, stopped, and nobody even touched him, and he grabbed his leg. Mike Daniels, same thing. He was running, he was rushing, play was dead, and no one touched him, and he grabbed his back of his leg. These soft tissue hamstrings and quads, it's troublesome. I don't know what else the Packers can do. It's training and hydration related for the most part. But so you lost one of your major offensive weapons in the first series. Then you lose your best defensive player in the next series, and that proved, I think right there, that the game was essentially sunk. I mean, it may have been competitive at that point, but it's very hard to overcome that, especially with not only does Mike Daniels, he's a pass rusher, he can get after the quarterback, but he's our number one run defender on the defensive line. So once he was out, I mean, it was tee off. They were running, passing, and Julio Jones. What can I say about that guy? He's the best receiver in the league. He looks like Randy Moss in his heyday. He is just big, physical, fast. And whoever the Packers could put on him couldn't do anything. I made a note here that, Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, who were their top 2 defensive back picks in 2015, they're regressing, week to week, it seems. Quentin Rollins got benched early in the game. Demarius Randall got benched, and part of the reason they got benched is because they played so poor, early in the game that they had to go to some other guys, and normally they'll ride that out a little bit, but and they finally put in Kevin King, the first round draft pick, and he played great. I don't know, he probably was pretty loose, because not a lot of pressure on him, but they put him against Julio Jones. He didn't give up any receptions in the whole game. 40 defensive snaps, 0 yards, 0 passes completed. So that was a bright spot, I will say.
Hey, I thought you were going to only cover negative stuff first.
Yeah,
we're supposed to close on the good stuff.
Stenographer, but I was just rolling.
But I think that
it is.
I think that's really positive. I mean, so sometimes you can utilize a blowout like this to give some opportunities like that,
and I think that's what they did because look, I mean, the Dom Capers and Mike McCarthy, they know what they have in Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, and it ain't much. They're putting them out there because that's what they got, and they're high draft picks, and so they take precedence, and they're the guys who practice all week. But they are who they are. They're inconsistent. They're not very good. I mean, they're backups at best, I think. I don't know if they're in the wrong defensive scheme or what, but they're just not playing with confidence. So yeah, I'm sure they just said, hell with this, put King out there, and King is, he's tall and physical, great tackler, I can tell you that. But he's 6'3", so for a cornerback, that's huge. That's like Richard Sherman for the Seahawks. Most cornerbacks are less than 6 feet tall. So to have a guy that tall, have that much length, and be able to play that well is rare. And so that is definitely a good positive. He needs to keep carried forward. But let me tell you something. King is your starting cornerback. Whether Demarius Randall or Quentin Rollins, those guys aren't going to see the field much anymore. They're not good. I don't know what else to say. Because the number 2 receiver, was it Sanu, Mohamed Sanu? He ripped them up too. I mean, the Julio Jones, the pass defense was poor. In general. So I think I made the comment, before we even started recording this, that this looked like basically a continuation of the NFC Championship game on defense. It looked no different. It really didn't. I mean, for all the hype of the offseason where Packers were going to play this nitro defense and get faster, I didn't see it. It just didn't. So, yeah, and that's a fast track. Playing at Lambeau on grass is slower. I mean, would that have been a different game had it been at Lambeau? Sure. Do I think the Packers would have won? No. I think it would have been more competitive, though. But that's just kind of reaching.
Right. Well, so there was the BS
I didn't
penalty.
Put that in here. You're right. There was some shit. I'm going to call them out there. There were some shit penalties on the Packers. The pick plays they called against them were. I mean, at the time when they were called, they were big. There was a long gainer to Cobb that they wiped out to Martellus Bennett. It was a crap call. And what's.
Yeah, and he's an experienced player. I don't think, I legit think he did not commit the penalty. And and Aaron Rodgers was going to bat and coach. Well, what they were gonna?
Oh my God, he was turning so red. It was like by the second he looked like what was I saying to? I think I made a comment to my dad. I said he looks like a nesting doll that's about to explode.
Yeah,
I did not. I heard when he goes. I didn't hear what I wanted to hear, and that's code. I mean, doing the lip reading. Oh my God, I've never seen so many F bombs and just spit flying out. And was he? And you know what? He had a right to. And part of the reason he was that mad too was the Falcons. I don't know if you noticed this. The Falcons scored a touchdown on a similar play. They ran a pick and it wasn't called. And I mean that was a big issue there. So but yeah, it was kind of funny seeing how red Mike got, and he's known to have a big temper, and that went on full display. But
so we might have got a touchdown in garbage time, but I feel like we should have had one anyway. So I don't feel like it was quite as bad of a mismatch, and you put any of those injuries back in. I feel like it's completely
I think to a
point.
I will say this though, I don't have empirical evidence to back it up, but if the Falcons wanted to hang 50 on us, they could have done that. They took their foot off the gas in the second half. They were just trying to run out the game, the clock. They could have hung 50 on us pretty easily if they wanted to, because we couldn't cover shit. They took their foot off the gas. They were, again, just trying to wind down clock. And that's part of the reason Aaron Rodgers got, on the defensive, they started playing kind of that prevent, where they're saying, you're not going to get us deep, but we'll give you these 10-yard, little dink and dunks. So Rodgers' stats looked a little better, but Rodgers played poorly. Yeah. I even made a note here. I said, I don't really care what the apologists say, because you get a lot of people saying, well, behind that offensive line, this, that, or the other. And there's truth in that. But he made a couple plays that directly cost the Packers. I mean, they contributed directly to the loss. That interception he threw deep in the territory, that was a Favre-esque throw. Now, Allison looked like he might have kind of held up a little bit on the route, got confused. But in that situation, Rodgers doesn't make that throw. You can tell he was getting a little desperate. So he wouldn't have made that throw to Jordy Nelson. And he made it to Allison, who was just coming back from suspension. And there were two other passes he threw that should have been picked that weren't. So he was getting rattled. And then I made a specific note here that on the lateral, or the one they said wasn't a forward pass. That play was specifically designed to be what they call a hot route. So if you actually watch the film of that again, I watched it earlier this morning. On that play, right away, like all the offensive linemen like get really low on the ground to do what they call a cut black, and that's just to get at the guy's legs. So they all just kind of do this one motion, and when they do that, what they're doing is they're just trying to slow down these defensive guys just enough. But Rodgers has to take that snap and he has to fire it to this hot read, and it was supposed to be Cobb. And for whatever reason, he didn't throw the ball. And that's like a rookie quarterback mistake. Because when those defensive or offensive linemen drop like that, it's just, the bull in the china shop. Those guys, those defensive players were running free, and he got smashed. I mean, you saw that on that play where he actually threw the ball up there. I thought when that happened that he might have been knocked out of the game there, or he might have broken a bone, because he landed hard on his right arm. He ended up playing the whole game, and he seemed to be okay, but he took a pounding in that game. And he made a couple, like I said, there were a couple, mistakes that you just don't see him make. That first interception and then not hitting that hot route, it cost the team 14 points, straight up. So very uncharacteristic for Rodgers.
Right.
But, again, they were stuck behind it. Now, the Falcons had some injuries too, but they didn't have nearly as many to keep players. I mean, the Packers lost so far a lot of key players, starters. These aren't, backups or whatever. You're talking, Randall Cobb had a shoulder injury. Jordy Nelson had the quad. Mike Daniels had the hamstring. Both starting tackles are out. There's 5 players right there. 5 starters, 5 key contributors. That is hard to overcome. Right. I'll admit that. But, you still want to keep it competitive. And the fact that they couldn't keep it competitive was disappointing. Yeah,
and they're supposed to be next man up. So
there's certain areas where they didn't have much depth. Offensive line was number 1, outside linebacker was another, and actually defensive line when you think about it, because Mike Daniels is hurt, but also Dean Lowry. So they don't have a whole lot of healthy bodies there. And if one guy goes down, and that's Daniels, the main guy, you can run or pass on that defense. And if you can do both, you're screwed because you don't know what's coming. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So, any other bad points?
Well, actually, the first thing I have, not first thing, but the next thing I have here is another bright spot. Ty Montgomery on offense looked pretty good. They didn't dominate in the run game again, but I think he's turning into that kind of, I kind of said tongue in cheek the other week that he's like a poor man's Darren Sproles. That's kind of selling him short, but he's a pass catching, running back option. And I think he's done pretty well. And he made a couple good plays. He scored a touchdown, and I think he did, didn't he? It was on the, was it on the first? Yeah, he did on the first, on that first possession he did. So yeah, he was a bright spot on offense. And again, I mentioned Kevin King. So, in a sea of shit, those were two players on each side of the ball that still did well. Other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot of good to talk about. Just wasn't. That game was over in the third quarter, and guys were dropping like flies. A lot of injuries.
Well, yeah. I mean, okay, so a Sunday night game that I
didn't watch the fourth quarter. I was on the road driving back. My dad was like, I'm not going to watch. He's like, I'm not going to watch this anymore. And it was getting late.
So you left.
I got to get back too. So I just listened to Wayne Larrabee's call on it, and it was, oh well. But so, I made a note here that 3 things, and they're kind of negative, but they're still, I think I like to frame up certain negative things as, they're realities. They might be bad, they might be negative, but they just are. And one that's coming true to form here is ever since the Super Bowl, Mike McCarthy coached teams, when they play good to very good teams on the road, specific to that, not at home, but good to very good teams on the road, a lot of times they're barely competitive, and it's just, it's a trend, and it's not good, and Rodgers getting outplayed by some of these guys. We know how good Rodgers is. He is a great player without question, but there are times when he'll put up strange games, I guess, and he'll be outplayed by lesser quarterbacks. And I don't know if that's, he doesn't have enough talent on offense or where that lies, but it's just a theme that's kind of coming. I'm trying to think the last big road victory that the Packers had in prime time was probably when they played the Texans, and I think Rodgers had 6 touchdowns, but that was 5 years ago. So, they can smash the average to mediocre teams, but when they face good teams on the road, it's slim pickings for wins. And then I think, to state the obvious here, the Packers as a team, and I mean offense and defense, they lack speed. They have good players. Don't get me wrong. It's not like there's a dearth of talent everywhere, but my God, just watching that game, the Falcons on offense and defense, they were playing on another level of speed. It was like the Packers were a step slow on both sides of the ball. They need some more speed. They have some guys with speed, but they're not playing them. Trevor Davis and Jeff Janis. Jeff Janis is fast. He runs a 4.4. They never play him. I guess they don't trust him. But God, I mean, Julio Jones is a freak. Sanu is fast. I mean, and that Devontae Freeman, that running back for Atlanta, he is fast. It really is almost like watching two different levels of competition at times. When I was watching the screen, I'm like, God, the Falcons are faster, or the Packers are slow. It's just odd.
Well, they get any play time in the new stadium ahead of time?
No, I think you do make a good point
that
the that AstroTurf that those dome type stadiums, because I guess you could call it a hybrid dome. They can open and close it. That's a fast track. They say a lot of times if we get them at Lambeau on grass, they'll play slower. But still, I mean, the Falcons are playing on the same surface that the Packers are. Even though it isn't Packers' home field, and they're playing at a different speed. It is a different track, but man, Packers just look slow at times. They need more speed. They got a couple guys that are getting there, but they need more speed. I mean, let me put it this way. So, and not every NFL team can say this, obviously. I mean, Julio Jones is the best wide receiver in the league. Not every team has a Julio Jones, but, since Aaron Rodgers has been the quarterback, who's been a wide receiver that can just take the top off the defense and fly down the field? I don't know if he's ever really had one. He's had good receivers, Greg Jennings and Donald Driver and James Jones, but those guys weren't just burners. Julio Jones is, he's a burner, and he's fun to watch. No,
so you don't think
Jordy's very savvy, but if you look at the collective 40 times, he's athletic and he's savvy but if you look at his straight line speed, he's not a burner. I mean, Jeff Janis could outrun.
But I thought Jordy had good yards after.
Well, that's yards after the catch. But I mean, if you send him on just a straight go route, he's not going to outrun cornerbacks. A lot of what can be done there, and this is a good discussion to have just in general. But where a lot of receivers who aren't the fastest, where they can really become savvy and hone their craft, is their route running. Jordy, he's athletic. He's not like he's a bum or anything, but he's so good with running the routes and picking those positions and angles and all that he plays fast. He can appear to play fast. But let's put it this way: if you put Julio Jones out there on one side and Aaron Rodgers was thrown to either one of them, say Julio's on the Packers, he's on the right side, Julio Jones, or Jordy Nelson's on the left side. Julio Jones is going to blast past him. He is much faster than Nelson.
Yeah.
So the last burner receiver that the Packers have had, man, it's going back to the Favre days, and even then, you'd almost have to go back to like Don Beebe as like a really fast receiver, because they have Trevor Davis. They have it. The Packers have him, and he's the punt return guy. And he's a receiver, but they never play him. They either don't trust him. And Jeff Janis, same thing. Jeff Janis has been on this team for 4 years. He never plays. They don't trust him. But I think they're going to have to find ways to get those speed guys on the field. They have to. So hopefully they do.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Those are three.
Yeah, the
you said
last
you had
one
three
was.
things. So those are three things.
I think it's safe to say that the defense's "quote unquote" dominating performance against Seattle was pretty much a mirage. Now, with saying that, if you're supposed to beat if the defensive line of the Packers was supposed to dominate the offensive line of the Seahawks, then they should, and they did. So you get credit for that, but it also exposes how bad Seattle's offensive line was. I mean, I put a note here that Seattle barely won against the 49ers. They won 12-9. And that exposes Seattle's got offensive problems, and their offensive line is atrocious. It is not good. The Packers, again, they did what they were supposed to do. They dominated, but again, a good team. I mean, the pass rush wasn't really there. They didn't have Matt Ryan under pressure a lot. And part of the reason with that, Mike Daniels goes down. He only played, 5 minutes that game. So that definitely alludes to that. But the offensive line of the Falcons is, appreciably better than the Seahawks. And so this was a real test. What I'm kind of getting at is this is that real test, and they got the doors blown off them last year in the NFC Championship game. And what's just disheartening is basically it was a repeat performance, and that's so if they meet again in the playoffs and they have to play in Atlanta, I can't see anything changing. But you never know. They have to find a way to get them at Lambeau, but.
Well, it's a long season. Not a sprint. Even if it seems short, it's very long.
It's true. So,
and we're 500. Yeah. That's a good place to be.
The Packers have a tough schedule.
We're proving we do, and we play. I mean, if you look at it, the first two games should have been, and one was really tough, and one was not so tough, but.
I don't think Seattle's terrible, and I'm not trying to diminish that win.
No,
because they're still a good team, but the offensive line of Seattle is a huge issue for them, and that's becoming apparent. But they beat them. You give them credit for beating them, and the defense dominated them. But the Falcons, I mean, they've lost to them 3 times in 11 months, and that's depressing.
I know. Yeah. That is tough. It feels like those, like how it used to be with the Cowboys or
Seattle or the 49ers. I mean, Mike McCarthy was 0-4 against Jim Harbaugh and Kaepernick and all that. Never beat him.
That's right.
But let me put it this way,
which is baloney.
I mean, they lost to the Falcons and they got blown out. But I'll tell you what, the Falcons look like the best team in the NFL right now. They look like the best team in the NFC and the AFC. I mean, if you threw them both in there, I mean. After the Falcons look pretty much far above anybody else. I'm trying to think of somebody else in the NFC who's close to the Falcons. It's kind of like the Falcons, and then there's the notch below them, and so it may be Falcons, and then below them maybe the Cowboys. Other teams that come to mind are AFC opponents, but I mean the Packers. I don't really know where they're at. It's still early, but Their offense is still kind of funky.
We're as good as the Cowboys.
Aaron Rodgers, what's interesting? He only has, let's see, I think he has 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, which for him is horrible. I don't think he's ever had that. For him, for others, it's not that bad because it's early in the season. But Rodgers has never, had a 1-to-1 ratio for touchdowns and interceptions, and. I don't know. Yeah. It's kind of a sluggish start for the offense, and they're not running the ball well. Let's hope.
Figure it out. They keep pushing that, and I just cringe because it's like, all right, so we're going to run it the first 2 downs.
It's almost like banging your head against the wall. It's like here comes the first. And
what does that even do?
I agree. And McCarthy's like, we got to run the ball. I'm like, my ass, you want to throw it all the time, and so Montgomery.
Yeah.
I like where he's trending. I was a skeptic coming in, but I really like where he's trending. And if they continue to find ways to use him more in the passing game and coming out of the backfield and stuff like that, if they can isolate him, I like what's going on there. But they got to find a way to get Bennett involved and the other tight ends. Those guys, Bennett had a horrible game. My goodness.
Right. Yeah, I saw your note on that, and I guess I didn't really think of it as being so horrible, but
4 drop passes.
Penalty.
The penalty was kind of bush league, but
he did have a few drops.
He looks kind of slow,
right.
And I don't know if that's just me just watching him, but he's getting older. He's 33. I want to say maybe Rodgers' age, so it's not like he's a spring chicken or anything, but he doesn't. he doesn't seem to have burst, but they got to get him involved. He's too savvy of a player to not, make a difference. But I mean, if you're dropping passes, they're not going to throw to you. So he dropped 4 freaking passes. It's not good.
Yeah, that is crazy. I just want to throw 2 quick things in. You always like to do outside of football stuff. I did catch that Ron Wolf Way is supposedly going to be opened or christened or whatever tomorrow. And then you mentioned Kaepernick, and I think that's a good segue to this the upcoming game against Cincinnati, because I have the understanding that some of the fans were clamoring for them to bring Kaepernick on.
I have not. I know that Andy Dalton, their starting quarterback, he's putrid right now. He's a really up and down player. He's never been that great, but apparently this year he's just awful. And they're
well, they're 0-2.
Just wait till Capers gets a hold of them, though. But then,
so I don't know.
Just kidding. But that would be something. I did see, talking about Kaepernick now, one thing I did see, and this was, I think it was just on social media or something, that apparently someone got a hold of him and asked him, and he said he's ready and he does want to play. Like, he came out and actually said, all these people were speaking for him. He needs to play. You didn't hear from him. He wants to. And it sounds like he said he's ready and he's been working at it. I don't know.
And he can beat the Packers.
Man, I'll tell you what. Look, Kaepernick owes his entire signing bonus to Dom Capers. He should sign that check over.
You're not the only one to say that. Yeah. So I don't know if we have too much else to say. I don't know if you have any comments on the upcoming game.
That's the Cincinnati game. I mean, let's. I think they're playing Cincinnati, then they play the Bears. They're both at home, so they should, in theory, and let's hope that they're 3-1, in the next 2 weeks. But it's the NFL; you can't just show up. So, I mean, could Cincinnati come in and beat them? Sure. I mean, at Lambeau, I'd be very surprised, and the Bengals don't look very good, but that should be a win. And then the Bears, the Bears aren't a very good team, but their defense is actually on the rise. And in the past, they've laid a couple eggs with them. So, division opponent, all that. I mean, you can't take that lightly. But if they can, they should be 3-1 after this, and we'll get a barometer of how good the team seems to look. And then, I mean, that had to be a pretty demoralizing defeat for them. So let's hope they don't come out slow against the lowly Bengals. Let's hope they come out, hair on fire and blow them out of the gym. I'd like to see that.
I think that'll be. I
hope
case.
So. And I hope they try more wrinkles with the offense and get the tight ends more involved and all that good stuff. But
yeah, like how about run the ball every 5th play instead of 4 out of 5?
I've talked.
I
hear you, and I've talked about this. And Andy Benoit, who he writes for MMQB, and they did a little breakdown of after the Falcons game. And one thing you hear from all the X's and O's guys and the guys who break down a lot of film that know a hell of a lot more than me is they all say the same thing, that the Packers offense is very simple and rudimentary. It's kind of a line them up and beat them. There's very little deception. There's very little creativity. There's very little scheming and mixing of route combinations. And that was part of the reason that, not last year, but the year before that, when Jordy Nelson tore his ACL in the preseason, they couldn't get anything. They were figured out, defenses figured them out, and they couldn't do anything. McCarthy refused to do any changes or any wrinkles. I hope we're not seeing that again, but you just see a lot of guys say that. They say the Packers just, they run a lot of simple concepts, and they have for a long time. And, Rodgers is a great quarterback, but he needs help. And sometimes I wish they would introduce some creativity. And maybe that's where Montgomery comes from. But you can do it even with other tight ends and whatnot. So I hope to see more of that. But, we'll see.
Yeah, they got to mix things up.
I agree.
Somehow.
But these guys are stubborn. McCarthy's stubborn. He's got a tried and true offense that's been working for a long time. But I don't know. I mean, this is a big year when you think about it, because everybody was like, after the NFC Championship loss last year, it's like, oh my God, this defense, they got to do this, that, or the other. And, this is Aaron Rodgers prime and all that. And I keep saying, but I mean, if they finish poorly and they bow out in the playoffs early, something's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to be, but this is a big year, And Ted Thompson actually went out and bought, make it sound like he bought a car, but he got some free agents from other teams and whatnot. So they went out of their comfort zone on that, and if that doesn't work, getting to the divisional playoffs isn't good enough. Getting to the NFC Championship and losing isn't good enough. Because they did that. They got to get over that hump. So it's a big year for the whole regime.
So, you have a prediction for against the Bengals? My prediction for the Falcons was close in score, but kind of flip flop.
Can't even remember what I said. I think I put something out there on the Facebook page, and I was like, I'll pick this, and I picked them to win. I was like, it's because I'm a homer. I had this caveat in there. With the Bengals, I mean, they should. I would think they should win by 2 scores, which means they should win by at least 10 points, a field goal and a touchdown. But the offense needs to get off the schneid. I mean, in the first half of games this year, they've only scored 7 points. That's not good enough. You figure with an Aaron Rodgers led team and all that, they got to start clicking. This could be the time to do it. So I'll say it's going to be 31-17 Packers. How does that sound?
That seems all right. I mean, it's at home.
You weren't convinced.
I bet it's not as high scoring. I don't know.
It depends.
I don't know. I mean, the Packers haven't been scoring that much lately, so I don't know if we're playing a mediocre team that we're.
The Bengals aren't good, but they could be backed into a corner. That's the other thing. It's like in the NFL again, you can't just show up. You just,
No.
So.
Yeah. So I don't know. I would peg it more like 24-17, that kind of thing.
I mean, yeah, I could definitely see that too. I'm kind of, I'm not the greatest prognosticator of.
Well, I don't know that anybody really is.
Well, what's funny is like at the beginning of the year, remember Vegas was like, "Oh, the Patriots are going to go undefeated," blah blah blah, and they lost their first freaking game and they got blown out. I'm like, "Oh, so much for that."
Right.
So.
Right. I'd love to be the guys that put money down on that.
Shit. Yeah.
So that I don't have much else because it was kind of a bummer of a game. So I'd like to forget it and move on to the next one.
As they say, burn the tape. On to the next one.
Burn the tape on to the next one. So so we'll have we'll have 2 next week, and then none the next week.
Correct.
Okay.
And we need to tell people to call
that's the game. So I don't know. That is true. And I was actually thinking about, so if some people are shy and they don't want to call in, so if they want to, just put something on Facebook or on Twitter and they want to just tag it, they could, hashtag Absolute Packer and we'll see it. Or they can call in 508-535-5468. And they can leave a voicemail, and we'll play it. And hopefully, it's all upswing here on out. We, Packers are, we have 1 loss for the season. That would be awesome.
Right. I concur.
So that's all I got. Go Pack.
Go Pack, go. Sounds good. See ya.
Podcast.
Chair.
I know, right?